I think for the open forensics, the first unit, I almost finished all of it except I think 2 that I could.
Okay, that's decent. Well, check the forensic class next semester. Okay, let me share screen and then I'll go ahead and turn on projection. So we are going to cover chapter 9 today. You will be able to find your, what is going on? Oh. It's not fun. You will be able to find your course information for Unit 9 in Canvas. So hopefully that setup screen will go away. Mute it. Okay, so go ahead and download your assignment and the notes, and then let me see if I can get rid of this. Oh, it is going away. Okay, so we are going to cover the assignment and notes. So let's take a look at the notes first. So this week we're going to talk a little bit about defense in depth, which entails multiple areas in the solution for security. That means that you have to look at the solution from a lens of physical, administrative, and also your system configuration, right? A well-rounded solution would consist of the areas in your environment, your hardware, your buildings, your people, and your system setup. So the first question really addressed what defense in depth would be, and it is a practice in that we would layer our protection in controlling our resources based on what we have on hand, right? So it talks about how we would have control diversity. That means that you have to implement solutions that address the technical, which is your area in IT, the administrative, which deals with people, rules, the operation of the business, and then the physical control that pertains to the building, door locks, security, surveillance, the physical areas of your organization. So in the first question, we can say that our defense in depth in cybersecurity really means that we are going to implement layers of protection. And our layers should always include administration, configuration, and physical. And that also addressed number 2. Hello, we started with the assignment for Unit 9. And so in number 2, it asks you what would be the type of control for defense in depth. And you need to know that we need to have technical. That means that we can configure policies like for password accounts. We can configure a firewall, our network intrusion detection system, and so on. And then we have to address the administrative, right? The rules, the regulations, compliance, the people, their actions, and also the physical control. And that also pertains to fire, building, surveillance systems like camera, your server room, temperature control, backup power, all kinds of things. So we're going to talk about that today. Any question? So we want to have a diversity. So whenever you think about security solutions, it needs to have a combination of things and not just one thing. A lot of the times I think we're really good at protecting our networks and our system, right? We have to really think about how that can be maintained through the people by giving them appropriate training, and then also protecting those systems as assets in the organization. Okay. So coming back to your notes, it goes into the physical security. And we would think about how we would protect the actual physical existence of the company by implementing security guards, right? A lot of that is deterrence, right? Gates, security guards, barricades, fencing. Those things really act as deterrents, but it never really omit the risk 100%. In security, we will never be able to address the problem with one solution at 100%, right? So you can implement some of the areas in the physical, like we can put up barricades, we can use steel rods, we can put up gates, we can put up security guards, and so on. In the building itself, we need to implement lighting, video surveillance, alarm system, including theft and fire, right? So a security solution for a brand new company, you really need to address those things. Okay. So when you act as a consultant coming into the company, if they're building a brand new company, you get to design the network, right, with the security in mind, and you also need to implement the solution to protect the resources like your systems for that network. So we also need to look at restricted and classified. So in pen testing, you might be asked to see if you can penetrate in the physical area, right? Like how can you access a certain restriction or a certain restricted area as a pen tester? For example, entering doors without any kind of badge, right? Going into server room, opening doors or access people's computer system physically, not remotely through our connection. Then for your server room, we need to look at how we can limit access for the internal employees and the external people. And when you're working with data center, you might think about how your environment is being cooled, right? So they have what's called the hot and cold aisles. That means that the back of the systems are facing each other, and that's going to be the heated area. And the air needs to circulate out to the cold vent, which is the front of the system. And this needs to be thought of when you're putting in your racks and things like that. Now, if the racks are already situated, we need to think about how we can better ventilate our server room, because if your server room is above 70 degrees, right, your systems are going to run poor. So in the next part, it asks you to identify 3 types of physical security control. And it could be a lot of things, right? We can place a few security guards to keep an eye and make sure we maintain a physical log of who's entering and leaving the building. We can also put up surveillance camera system, and that's fairly easy to maintain nowadays. We can also, the most important thing that you need to think about is how we are using locks as mechanism to prevent and to deter. Like locks on server doors, right? Server room doors, in offices, in your backup storage area, things like that. So those are just a few things that I put down as far as the physical. But you can do more. You can add like fire alarm and theft alarm. You can add sensors like motion detection and so on. Okay. Now, we can be very advanced in how we are implementing the security control, or we can make it where it just meet the baseline, which is just the minimum requirement for the company to operate. So when you work for the government, as some of you probably have heard, seen, or have done, right? Department of Defense, you have to have clearance, right? You cannot enter a certain area. You are only going to be allowed in certain corridor. If you are using your badge elsewhere, right, you won't be able to access those things. So the physical security is important because there's data systems that can be taken and removed. Bless you. So another thing that we can consider is to use a Faraday cage. And this is done a lot with hospitals and companies that require specialty equipment. So Faraday cage is the way that we can block signal because you have a lot of radio frequency interference, and radio frequency interference can prevent or damage your system. So it can prevent signal from communication. So if you're dealing with like X-ray machines or MRI machines, especially, so we can use a room or like a storage container to really block the radio frequency. Elevator is really good for that. I think some of the steel elevator are being used quite a bit. And so, and sometimes we can use like water and glass to bounce signal, okay? And also, you can also use devices to really block signal, especially Wi-Fi, because your routers and your wireless devices operate on different frequency, right? Starting with 800 megahertz. So what you can do is you can implement a wall, right, in the form of a room to really block out some of the signals. So Faraday is a way that we can prevent radio frequency signal to travel in a certain area because that could damage some of the system. I think you see this a lot if you guys ever go to like sports stadium or things that they don't want you to stream. You have to subscribe to their streaming service. They would use a signal blocker. So in a way, it's actually a Faraday cage. And IT people set that up. Any question? Okay, so some of the things that we need to think about is our cabinets need to be locked, and you can use digital lock nowadays, right? You can use bolts, you can use safe, you can use a lot of things to really secure your physical items. So industrial camouflage is a way that we can hide buildings and things, right? Sometimes you drive by unmarked building that belongs to government. I don't know if you guys ever been on the other side, like the Alessandro Riverside, right? You drive by Northrop, it's like right near Mission Grove. On the right side, if you pay attention, there's a small street that cuts through. It's called Northrop, right near Mission Grove. And if you look there, that's government contracted defense company on the right-hand side, right? You can't pass the gate if you don't have any kind of identification. And in that, you can't really see the building when you're driving by because it's full of like trees and plants and things like that. So they actually hide it behind some of the things. So you can use like landscaping and things like that to really take away the visual of the building, because if people can't see, they don't access, and that's the whole point. If you drive by near March Air Force, there's a couple unmarked buildings. One of my friends used to work in one of those unmarked buildings, and because even March is not fully operational, right? You still have people, technical people, that's maintain some part of the March Air Force Base that's tied to our government contracted individuals. So that's a way that we can, remove signs and things like that. That's going to be obvious and so on. Okay. And then air gap refers to how you can isolate network and systems. And in our world, especially on the network side, we can do it several ways, right? Like we can set it up on a virtual local area network where we can completely isolate them. We can put them on another port on our switch. We can disconnect the system from the network and make it stand alone, and so on, right? However, a lot of times we have to connect them together to really control. So in some sense, certain sensitivity in the data needs to be isolated. So you have to really determine And later on, we'll talk about data classification and how you can rank that. Okay. Okay. So the terminology security plus, CompTIA security plus, they're going to expect you to know these things. So make sure that you are aware of it, read about it, understand it, and so on. Okay. And then we are also using drone nowadays, right, to really monitor and survey the system. And you probably have seen video of people taking down drones, right? So drones operate on Zigbee, and Zigbee is, think of it like almost like a form of wireless signal, right? If you use a drone and you play with a drone before, you can control a drone with a controller, and all you have to do is sync that signal, right? On the larger drone, like in the government drones, you would have Zigbee signal, and then all you have to do is interrupt the signal, right, to be able to take down or disconnect the controller from the drone. And then if they really want to take over the drone, it is a computer system. It is embedded system, and usually those run Linux. And so it's a way that you all just need to remotely connect to it to be able to take control over it and writing a script for it. So things that we have to consider, it's going to be also moisture and temperature, because that's going to be the enemy of your hardware devices. Okay. All right. So as some of you are going to transfer to Cal State San Bernardino, for your capstone project, you have to really derive like a complete solution for a network. And it's going to come down to these little small things too, right? Fire suppression. I think we touched on this before. Do we use water or do we use gas, right? Gases could be poisonous to the people, but it's good for our system. If we use water, it can be damaging to our system, but then good for the people. So we have to weigh the risk, okay? And then, you know, how you are going to be able to disrupt the chain of action. Okay, so let's touch on the next few questions. So the type of sensors that we can use to protect the physical of our organization would be motion detection. That's used a lot in alarm system, okay? Especially when you have things that are very expensive or sensitive. So as business operate 24/7, you can put motion detection in a certain area, like your server room, where it's not commonly accessed by a lot of people. And you see this, like how they would protect like arts at the museum, right? As soon as the frame is moved, right, it automatically sends some kind of notification. So we can set that up where the sensors connected to our system and it would notify the administrator or the manager. Noise detection, that is really to be used to prevent any kind of physical damage. Like for example, I use noise detection in my company, and I can configure it where it would generate some notification if like somebody bashed a window, right? Or crashed their car into the wall, trying to break into the facility and so on. Now, you know, prison system have IT people, and prison system is very secure, right? You have biometrics and you have like image recognition, you have a lot of things happening in the prison system. And they hire IT people through the county all the time. So you see some of that with the prison system, right? Noise detection, motion detection. And then for us, we deal with temperature and moisture detection because we work with a lot of electronics. And so if you have a lot of moisture, that causes rust on the board. And then if you have high temperature, that causes your system to fail. So we want to make sure that we can implement the appropriate sensor. And then there are other forms of sensors like card readers and things like that. You will talk about that. And those use either radio frequency or they use Wi-Fi. Hi. No problem. We just started with Unit 9 assignment. Now, cabling is very important. Okay. I don't know if you probably heard like a few years back. Like there were one day that we lost internet connection like coast to coast. Okay? Verizon, Charter, all the communication companies, you know, the big fish Charter and some of the big companies that provide television broadcast companies, right? AT&T, Verizon. So what had happened was somebody had access to the fiber, right? The fiber cabling, and those people, they cut them. Okay. So instead of just hacking and getting into system, right, they can disrupt the service by just cutting cable. So if your cables are hanging out and it's accessible to the public, right, somebody can just go in there with a wire cutter and clip it. Okay. So this is why your cable distribution is very, very important. Okay. So you can run your cable through the false ceiling, but if you look at this room, right, like every other panel, right, it is a fluorescent light. You cannot place your RJ45 or your Ethernet cable directly on your fluorescent light because it will disrupt the signal. Okay. So it might sound easy to just say, oh, I'm just going to run the cable from the front to the back of the room through the false ceiling, right? Because this is a false ceiling. Well, if you put it on top of the fluorescent light, then you're going to have to interrupt the signal. Do you see this metal line right here? Right? That goes from the front to the back. Most people think that it's just like, it acts as a connection because this room used to be half of the small. This used to be a separate thing, and this used to be another separate thing, right? So they removed the wall and then they put this as an enforcement to enforce the ceiling. But what IT people can do is we can run a conduit, right, from the front because you do need to have connections for the front system to the back to be able to have the cable distribution for the back ports. Okay, so you should use metal casing, but a lot of times you see conduit. If you go to Home Depot or hardware store, they sell like these rectangular tubes that you can put your cable through, and then you can mount it on your wall. So you can do it that way too. Panduit is a company that produced some of that, right? So now, because if we have damage to the cable to our router, we're in trouble, right? All they do is just clip it and you don't have any communication at all. Phone line, those things, satellite dish, big thing too, okay? Most people have satellite dish on the rooftop of their building, right? And if it's not gated or secure, people can go up there and destroy the satellite dish as well. So. Okay. You guys heard of card skimming, right?
Yeah.
So you guys hear about that heist a long time ago. I want to say almost 15, 20 years ago, where they have a group of people that fit in like 5 different or 10 different countries. So what they did was they had gotten, you know, those prepaid credit cards that you get from the store. You know, you can go and you say, hey, I want $100 Visa card that you can buy, right? So they bought a bunch of those, and magnetic strips can be modified to be able to be added on with like your identification information for ATM. So they bought a bunch of those, and what they did was like in the 3-day span, right? All over, they have different groups. They hit all the ATM machines, especially in New York. I think that was hit the most. And they got billions of dollars out of the ATM. And the account that they hacked was actually from the Bank of India. And so what they did was they hacked that account and they distributed it to these United States bank accounts. And then they go into the ATM and they pull the money out. Okay. So instead of transferring funds in large quantities from the Bank of India, they take the funds and they distribute it to like sub accounts in for like, you know, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and so on. And then they use those small little ATMs to be able to pull money, you know, the ones that you see at like liquor store, 7-Eleven, those smaller ones that charge you like $4 per transaction, right? Now those, they tend to have tampering with skimmer. right? So the sign for skimmer, when you see that, and that happens at gas station too. I think nowadays our ATM system and our POS systems have like a sensor where if something is mounted on it, it actually notifies the company, okay? And then it tracks it. And then a lot of times at the gas station, they have video surveillance so they could see it. But it's really, they can do it really fast because all you have to do is attach it to where you insert the credit card. Now they make it where you insert the credit card a little bit harder to do, and we don't use magnetic strip as much. We're actually using the chip more on most of our credit cards. However, right, they still using magnetic strip for the prepaid credit card, and that's an issue. So the skimmer, if you look at the seals, because that seals actually is attached to the sensor, when you see a point of sale system that's with the broken seal, or you know, the point of sale system that you insert your card and it's kind of loose and it's not reading your chip, it's this chip malfunctioning, right? Those sometimes they tend to be tampered with, that's why they're loose, or sometimes it's just the internal mechanism that's bad. Okay, so usually the POS company, there are only 5 in North America. Did you know that? Okay, and you have to be certified to install the point of sale systems in some of the terminals and so on. But anyway, so if you have a loose credit card reader, if you have an extension, it looks kind of like greenish sometimes. And sometimes it's attached to the mouth of your, when you insert your card, that's also a skimmer. So don't use it if it looks suspicious, right? Because what they can do is once you insert it, it skims your card and it reads the magnetic strip. They take that information and they put it on the prepaid credit card, and then they would use the prepaid credit card to pull money from your account. That's how they do it. Okay. ATM scams is like, it changes all the time, but a lot of times it comes back to skimming. They can also read, you know how you're using tap system, right? You tap and then you pay, or you tap with your phone, right? They can also make a signal reader that reads that too. Okay. Any question?
I actually saw one where it just had like a camera on it, and then we just record your kid, and then it's just like there's easier ways to do.
Yeah. I think PIN is just, I think PIN should die, right? Like I think PIN is just you know how easy. Yeah, I mean brute forcing a PIN is really easy because usually they're only like 5 or 7 characters. Yeah, or 4 characters for the ATM machine. Okay, so we talked about skimming, and then malicious flash drive. This, you know, I talked about rubber ducky before, but there are other type of flash drives like the Ninja USB, where it has hidden files that's be able to launch malware, like Trojan and so on. So don't plug in the USB, right? I told you the story that how they tested it. So the people long ago, they were like, oh, we didn't really test USB drop, right? So what they did was they tested with sticker bar. They went to the parking lot and they start spreading sticker bar on the ground, right? To see how many people actually pick it up and eat it. It's like next to their car. And it was like 80% of the people actually pick up candy on the floor and eat it. So they were like, oh, well, we can do the same thing with USB drop. So they started like spreading USB. And people are just curious, you know, or they're just good people and they want to return the USB to the right owner. So they plug it in, and simply you just need to disable the front USB port, or right, you know, make sure that people understand that if they find a USB, turn it into the IT people, and then we'll take a look at it. You know, but you can scan the USB before you open it. So.
Oh, that reminds me. I saw the Batman movie, and then he just takes the USB that originally came through, and then just plugs it into the work laptop. I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
So that's a fast way to really get malware to a network without having to breach anything, right? Yeah.
It wasn't his computer. I know, but he still put it. He didn't do it.
Okay, so let's talk about asset management. I think last week we touched a little bit on this, but asset management really allows us to assess and track our hardware, like our computers, our servers, and so on. The issues with that is most company run into undocumented assets. That means that they're not documenting all their purchases, right? Or somehow paperwork fell down and we're not able to track it. So part of the IT people job is to make sure that we're maintaining assets, like even on the low end ones, because I think most company only value anything that's $500 or more. And then we also run into system sprawl, meaning that the systems are not being utilized fully, or there are way too many than what it's needed for. So when you have access of anything, that opens up vulnerability because people, attacker or external people, can use that as a way to access your network. So we should only use what's needed, okay? And then it's also, you know, on the business side, it's not good for return on investment. So in asset management, it's a way for us to really implement processes that we can protect the dollar, right? The investment of the company. And so to overcome the undocumented system issues, we need to make sure that managers and people are following purchase and tracking processes. For example, like approval. If I was to buy something, right, here at NBC, I have to submit that to my manager. He has to approve it. It needs to go through the chain of command. And then it's going to come back before the fund is dispersed. And that's a way that we can also maintain the inventory, is as it's approved, right, it gets added to a system. Here at RCCD, they use a tagging mechanism. So anything above $500, a person would put an RFID tag on it and then record that tag, right, as what type of system it is, because that can also be used for maintenance purposes. So if you're looking at the back of the monitor of all these computers, you see these RFID tags, right? Those are used for tracking the inventory and also for maintenance, okay? So with that said, number 9, we just want to make sure that they maintain inventory and your information of your system and health, okay? Because when you depreciate the system, when we retire a system, that's usually the cycle is like 3 to 5 years, right? You would be able to track it through the processes. Any question? It's also, you know, if somebody steal the system, then we need to make sure that we monitor how we can do that. Okay. So how can I prevent people from like taking computers and things like that? I can walk by, instead of like hacking into that system, I can just steal the whole computer. How can I prevent that? You see this zip tie that they're doing, right? Just making it harder. Doesn't mean that I won't be able to do it. I can still cut them, right? Velcros and zip ties. And then cable locks is another one. Lock behind the case so people cannot open up your computer, because I can open up the computer and just rip out some parts and that's it for that computer, right? Or take the hard drive. That's one of the area that they can get data too. Okay. Server rooms is dangerous. We have to make sure that we protect what's in there. Okay. So we need to have, oh, what the heck is that? Some environmental control. So HVAC is really important. Most of the time HVAC is tied to, you know, SCADA system, which controls the whole building, like power and resources. Okay. But HVAC allows us to make sure that our systems are cool and low in moisture. You also need to implement fire suppression. Oh, where are all these bugs coming from? Nasty. Sorry. Fire suppression system. Okay. Here, I think they're using water, but it's, you know, your building cannot pass fire code if there's no fire suppression system. And then signal interference reduction. This is important, especially when you have a bunch of cables together. If you ever look at a server rack, there's so many different cables, right? And you know, usually we color code it and put a label on it, but you might have interference issues, or if you have a lot of wireless devices, that's going to be also important. So we need to find ways to make sure that our signal is staying intact, because all signal deteriorates eventually, right? Because it's just waves. But we want to make, you know, you can use repeater and you can use a lot of things to really and keep that signal consistent. However, if you have a lot of signal combined together, we run into signal issues. Okay, so the next section talks about environmental control. That's the bottom of page 2, going to page 3. Okay, EMI, interference of radio frequency. So what I can do is, in order to protect signal leak on cabling, you can use shield twisted pair, which is a little bit more than your regular Ethernet cable, where it has a foil inside the cover, which is the plastic coating for your cable. Most cable you buy nowadays are unshielded twisted pair, your UTP, right? If you take Mr. Loya's or my class, you probably have made cable before. And if you're taking my 40A next semester, you are going to remake some of the cable. But, you know, so we can use shielding to make sure that our signal is more intact. Okay. All right. Let's talk about redundancy. So this is so important for us. Okay. So redundant means that you want to have duplications of things. Your backup servers, your file servers, those things need to be backed up or be redundant. Your network connection is going to be important. If we only have one line out and in for our wireless router, like at your home use, what happens when you don't have that connection? You have no internet. If you don't have internet, if you run a business from home, you can't have a business, right? So you're going to make sure that you have a backup line, and that backup line needs to be secured. So a long time ago, the White House has a backup line that ties to its library. Okay. And there was a breach coming from that side because it was an analog line and somebody actually got in through that line. So, you know, it took them a little bit to really find out like where that was coming from. So some of the things that we have to consider is, even if you have a backup line, you got to protect that line as well. So you need to have backup disk and also redundant of the RIS. And so RAID is redundant array of inexpensive disks. This is a group of disks that you can use for backup or having additional duplication of your data. Failover server cluster, those are just your backup servers that goes on standby. It might not have all the update things that you normally have in the regular operation, but you need to have that, okay? Now, most companies the larger company uses a generator, but what if you're using UPS, uninterrupted power supplies, those are just battery, okay? Even on the solar battery, the $10,000 battery that they sell for solar system as backup power, those only last a few days, right? On the most use. So for most company, they would have some kind of power backup, because if we don't have power, we don't have computer system, okay? And then they would use PDUs to be able to manage, especially on your ASN. You guys know what ASNs are? They are like industrial routers that are used to pass things across the network. Okay. Or, you know, if you look around, like City of Riverside, they also have industrial router for the public Wi-Fi. So they would use solar, and then they also have a backup power connection. You also need to have NIC teaming. That means that we can group 2 or more network interface cards. So if one fails, the OS actually picks that up and removes that, okay? You can do that through the operating system, like server operating system. All right, so let's take a look at the next part. So what are some of the redundancy solutions that you can have for the organization? We need to have failover cluster. those are just a group of servers that goes on standby for most part, but when it's needed, we can use them to like DNS, DHCP to give out IP address, right? File server, email server, and so on. Now we can use cloud for that. Cloud, right? Let's say that I lease cloud with AWS or Azure, okay? I don't really have to maintain the power and all the physical, security part of it. It belongs to the cloud company. However, I need to make sure I have internet connection to connect to the cloud. So as long as I have connection to the internet, I can access the cloud server. And that's a challenge too, because if you come across earthquake storms and so on, fire, right? Sometimes you lose connection because you lose power and you lose internet connection. So there gotta be a secondary way that we would connect either via satellite or some kind of phone line, right? That might be slower, but you can still connect. Because if you lose your data, you can pull your data from your backup server from the cloud. And then we can use UPS. Most large size UPS can only last up to 2 hours for full use on a server. So a lot of people say, oh, just put a couple UPS. And then just like any battery, right? If you don't use them for a while, it becomes less and less. So you gotta test your UPS because sometimes like you don't use it for years, and then when it's needed, you can only turn it on for like 30 minutes and then it dies, and then you regularly charge it because the battery cycle gets less and less. Okay, and they're expensive; they're not cheap. So so you gotta maintain that too, and then redundant array of disks. So those are the group of disks that you can mirror your data. That means duplicate the copy. You can stripe your data. That means it writes fast to different disks. Okay, and so on. Now, if we're doing NIC teaming, we are doing redundancy on your server communication, right? Because network interface card is connected to the essential system. So we can have, so on a server, unlike your PC, it has multiple slots for network interface card. On a basic server, it would have at least 2 network interface cards. We can use it for in and out, right? Like for example, if I have a web server, I need to make sure that I can handle all the traffic going into that. So you can have multiple network interface card, and with that, you reduce the single point failure. So anytime that I have one point that can be taken down and cause interruption, that becomes a single point failure. Make sure you remember that for security class. Okay. So we can also increase system communication and performance, or communication in general, by teaming the NIC. Okay. And that reduces some of the potential area in disruption for communication. Okay, so let's talk about RAID. So RAID stands for Redundant Array of Inexpensive Disk. And I know some of you took the 25 class or currently in that now. So you probably have heard of RAID, okay? So when they refer to RAID 0, it's fast and it's striped. You need at least 2 hard disks. Okay, so that means that it's going to write to both disks at the same time. Okay, so if one of your disks fail and you have 2, you cannot retrieve your data if you're using RAID 0 because it needs both of them together to be able to read the data. If you have 3, it stripes across 3 and so on. Right, you have to have at least 2. If you're using RAID 1, if you have 2 disks, it's going to make a copy on one disk exactly the same as the other disk. So let's say I created file 1. It's going to put file 1 on disk 1 and file 1 on disk 2. The downside of that is you're only going to get 50% of the capacity because it's a mere exact duplicate of your files. Okay, so you're paying more for your data storage with RAID 1. RAID 5 requires at least 3 drives. If you haven't done CompTIA A+, you need to make sure you know your RAID. It's a legacy technology, but it's still being used, and so they will ask you on RAID. Okay. RAID 5 uses 3 or more disks. It uses striping. Okay, so it stripes across 3 disks. But the cool thing about RAID 5 is that it does error checking. Okay, so if 2 of my drives fail, then my data is lost. But if 1 failed, I still have data intact. Okay, and then RAID 6 is it has a parity block, and you need to have at least 3 disks, and it operates with 2 disks fail. So RAID 6 and 5, they're not that common. They're kind of pricey, right? So companies like Seagate, iOmega, you know, even Washington Digital, they make drives for RAID or with RAID capability. So that's a physical drive, and then you have RAID software that makes your hard drive becomes RAID capable. Okay. And then RAID 10 is a combination of 0 and 1. That means I can mirror the very sensitive data. But if I need to back up my data very fast, I can stripe it with a 0. Okay. So, you know, so that will give you more flexibility. So most company, large scale company, they are going to go with the RAID 10 solution. That's what you're going to see. Unless they have the other ones implemented, then you continue that. But most of the time you see RAID 10. So that's why our answer for that question, number 13, is RAID 10. And that's the most common solution that we see. Fast and also duplicating data well. Okay, any question? All right. I didn't mention this, but this is, we call it the 5 nines. So remember how we talked about CIA, right? Availability is an area in security that we need to address. We're going to make sure that our systems are always available. That means that you need to make sure that your system is 99.9999% available. If you calculate that, right, the 0.0001% is equated to 5.256 minutes. That means that in the whole entire year, your system can only go down for a little bit over 5 minutes if you're striving for all 5 nines. Some companies, they're going for 7 nines. That means even less. Okay. So how can I achieve 5 minutes of only downtime? What do you think? You have to come up with a solution. In the whole year, all your servers can go down for about 5 minutes. How can I achieve that? You have failover cluster server, right? So when I take a system down, I put the other one up. Okay. And I maintain it really quick. That means that you continue to have to maintain the system and monitor it at all times. And this is why IT administrator gets called at home when it shuts down. So let's say that I have memory error, right? My server crashed. It notifies me. I gotta boot it up right away because it has to be less than 5 minutes to get the 5 nines. You see? So the pressure in the job is to make sure that everything cannot go down more than 5 minutes. That's your goal. Okay. Communication, wireless, everything. Okay. Well, anything above that, then we don't have the 5 nines. Will be less. Some company is 92%, and they're okay with that, right? But you know, so you got to do the backup while it's running and so on. Okay, let's talk about. We already talked about server and power. Let's talk about load balancer. Okay, load balancer is very important. It's a way that we can distribute the data across multiple systems so it can pass things quickly. It's being regularly used in a network environment. We can do a round robin. That means that, like, think about it. If we're sitting in a circle, right? And then I pass the token to you, and then you pass it to the next one. As long as you ask me, I pass it to you, right? So in a round robin environment, the system communicates and it creates trust. Once it creates a trust, the token is passed for data exchange. then it, and it's one by one, so it's slow. Okay, so each server is going to communicate with the next server or the neighbor server, and it's going to communicate and ask. Okay, now you can handle it that way, or you can make it where it is distributed from a centralized standpoint, where I have a main server and it's going to connect to, let's say, other servers to be able to offload the task. Think of it like at home. If you're lifting something very heavy and you're like, hey, come and help me, and then 4 more people come and help you, and that weight becomes less. So what you do is you take that traffic and you distribute it to 5 different server or 4 different server where they're able to pass it quicker. So we can use an actual hardware, an appliance that does that, which are computer systems, or we can use the software to be able to do that. Most of the smarter switches and routing system has this capability nowadays. Okay, so okay, I haven't gone to backup. Any question regarding load balancer? And that will be also revisited in the network protocol more closely. Okay, let's talk about backup. So earlier we say that, we cannot take our system down for backup. So when you do an offline backup, you have to take your system offline, meaning that because your computer cannot perform well if it needs to back up while it's being used. Okay? The resources, it's going to be slower, and it can, but the resources is going to be fully maximized. So when you're doing an offline backup, you disconnect that system from being operational, or basically it's online. Okay, so when I do that to the database, you ever log on late at night trying to pay your bill, and it takes forever to load your account, right? They're doing maintenance on the system at that point, right? Usually most companies would do that, like based on our time zone, will be like 1 or 2 in the morning, or whichever window is the least used. Okay. So if they're doing that, they're doing online backup. That means that while the database is being used, it's also being backed up. Amazon does this to make sure that they don't lose the data. So for some reason, if you close, your browser while you're shopping, and then you come back to it, every item is still in your cart, right? Because they're doing live backup. Okay. So in an online backup, it's being performed during the operation while that system is being used. Okay. And backup software allows you to do that. Now, some system, the older system, you have to take it offline in order to do backup. And then while you're performing, depending on the size of the data. If you have lots and lots of data, it takes a while to back it up, okay? And even longer to restore. But if you have a little bit of change to your data, then it's only gonna be a short time. So backup, we normally build with a full backup first. That's everything in your system. Then after that, we can build on the changes of that subsequently. So if I do a full backup today, tomorrow I can just update the changes. So if the user added, let's say 3 more new files, it's just gonna take those new files and add it to the change. No point in recreating the full backup every day. Okay? I used to be a backup operator, so backup is fun, but at the same time you gotta test it, right? So in number 15, it asks you, what type of backup is suitable for a small local retail store that opens 9 to 9, right? So if we want to do an offline backup because they close, right? We can back up after they close, okay? So we can run a full backup the first day of the week, which is Sunday, at 10 p.m. after they close. With that, we would have the first full day of all the data. Then we can do a differential backup, which is the changes to whatever that was from Sunday. in the subsequent day. So I can on Monday, right? At the end of Monday, I can do a differential at 10 p.m. Now, the downside of that is anything that occurs throughout Monday, let's say at 12 p.m. or half day through, you lost half of a day data, don't you? Because you have to wait until the end of the day to get the backup for that day. Okay. So that's the downside in the solution is that you will lose data. So if I have a disruption halfway through the day and it wipes my data, right? I lost that half day sales. Okay. So is that acceptable to the store depending on the cost of that loss, right? Or I can lose almost 100% of the day at let's say at 8:30 p.m. Right? I got a breach and they wiped my data. I can only roll back to the Sunday, right? If I get breached on a Tuesday, I can roll back the Sunday and the Monday. So when you do restore, you have to start with the full and then add the differential to it, so it can be up to date. So if I have a disruption on Tuesday, I have to restore the Sunday and then add in the differential backup from the Monday to get to Tuesday. Okay? Question? Okay. So there's your backup information. Okay. Now, most company would use network attached storage, aka also cloud now, right? You can back up to another server on the cloud. SAN is more expensive, so and it's harder to set up. So you have to use a different protocol called the fiber channel, and it's a pain in the ass. I'm sorry to set up compared to network attached storage or your file server. So so the difference between SANs, and people lock them up all the time, it drives me insane, but the difference between NAS and SAN, right, even though the acronyms is like just swaps, right, is that the on the SAN, it requires specific protocol and specific hardware that's more pricey. Okay. On the network attached storage, you can make it a server with a dedicated drive for the network to attach. And so that drive alone, right, you can make it also RAID drive and you can send the data to it. Backups are images, right? Remember how we use images for virtual machines? So it takes a snapshot of your system and then add the changes to the snapshot. And as it does that, it archives the bit. So it switched the bits of the attributes to how it can tell that it has been backed up at a certain point. So when I did a full backup on Sunday, it changed the attribute, right, to a /A or whatever, and then it will know that at that point, anything that's modified after that, it's gonna be in the incremental or the differential. Okay. We will do backup this week, trust. Right, I'm gonna set up a lab for you to do that for your Windows 10. Okay, so what's the difference between differential and incremental? And this exists in CATIA A+ certification and also this class for the security class. So differential back up all the data that has been changed. So we talked about having a full on Sunday and then do a differential on Monday. So whatever's changed on Monday, that's going to be on a differential, data for backup. The incremental, that has been changed since the last full or the incremental. So that means that let's say I need to restore on a Thursday. I have to restore the full, the incremental on Monday, the incremental on Tuesday, and then the incremental on Wednesday to get to Thursday. Okay. Now on the differential, the differential is what's been changed since the full. So if I have a disruption on Thursday and I need to restore, right, I need to roll the full and then the differential up to Wednesday. I don't need to do the sequential like the incremental. Okay. Now, depending on the administrator or the operation of the company, people would choose from either one of those. Okay. I normally like to do differential because restore is a little easier. But some people, they like the incremental because they want to track the changes in their data, especially with database, and they do the incremental. So you have to roll the restore, like, you know, in sequential order from the full point and then all the subsequent. It takes a little bit of time. Restore, always give buffer time. It's always going to take you a little bit longer to do the restore than the backup. So if you back up, it takes you 2 hours to back up all the data, right? The restore, just the process, because your system has to read and write it, it's going to take either twice as long or sometimes longer. Okay, question. And you can work as a backup operator all day long, right? Those people come in a little bit different time, and so. Okay, here it talks about some consideration, right? Offsite location, cloud, or you also have to send your drive to a different location, right? There's a company, Iron Mountain, been in the business for as long as I've been in IT. They pick up your files, right? Folders, people use folders and files still. Your drives, all your digital content, and then they put it in those, you know, safeguard trucks that the banks use, and they drive it to their facility, right? And they store it for you. And then when you need it, right, you call them, they bring it to you. Okay, fast. Okay, and you pay like how you use storage. Okay, and then also sometimes you are required by the law. Did you know that HIPAA have different requirement? Your data has to be backed up for 12 years. You know how much data that is on patient's record? Lots, right? In communication, most communication company back up your text message. We talked about this, right? 3 years. They were fighting the 5 years. Now they're down to 3 years. So they can pull your text messages 3 years ago that you deleted if they have court order. And, you know, even if you delete it from your smartphone, it's on their server. Data is backup after backup. So when you remove things from Facebook, social media, right? Why is your account still exist? And all of these pictures, you know, when you activate it again, it comes back to you from 10 years ago. It's because they back up after backup. That's how they pull the data. All right, next question, right? Moving along. Okay, so what should you do to protect your backup media? We want to make sure that we put it in the lock cabinet if it's on site. It needs to be fireproof. I didn't put that, but yeah, I did. So sometimes people put it in safes. One of my friends used to be system administrator for a company, and they didn't have anything implemented first, so she came and she implemented the backup solution. She was driving around town with these backup drives in the back of her trunk, and I was like, what happens if like you crashed your car or somebody break into your car, that data is gone? Like, never do that, right? So want to make sure that it's in a fireproof area and it's locked. It's not accessible to people because people can take your data that way too. Physically remove your drive. You can send it to an offsite. We talked about Iron Mountain or some of the company. But you also need to test your backup periodically. So in an ideal place, you would have a catalog, right? Before it used to be a binder for most companies. So when I was doing backup, you log your backup and then you log your test. So if I'm backing up today data, I gotta test the stuff for this week, like yesterday, the day before. So that's continued. So in the case I need to roll for my restore, my backup is good, right? If it fails, I gotta go back and redo that backup, okay? Including the stuff, like all the stuff before today. So you have to test it and you gotta make sure that you track it. Because a lot of people back up their data, but they don't know if it works or not. And then when you restore, if it doesn't work, right, you're done, okay? All right, any question? All right, let's do number 17 together. So let's open up your browser. You can just search for network attached storage, because if you put in NAS, right, it will take you to a page of like the celebrity NAS. Okay, so we need to find one that's 10 terabyte or more. Okay. Well, you have options with all of these companies, right? Look, this one is 8 terabyte. That's not quite what we need. So how do you shop for these? You need to think about the amount of data that you know this can contain for, let's say, at least 5 years, because we're gonna buy this and then you know a few years from now we can upgrade. Okay. So if you look at it, it is a computer system, right? It just has the drives. Now be careful because some of them don't contain hard drive. When you see them and they say, oh, it is like, you know, so you got to read the description carefully. So I chose the Western Digital from Best Buy. This is USB enable. This looks like your external hard drive that you plug in, and it has a USB, it has its own power connection, right? And it's using a web browser-based interface where you can have it sync. Okay. I have a Seagate that does this. It automatically sync, and thank goodness for that drive, right? Otherwise, I would not have my PhD today because my computer crashed like right before I submit my dissertation. So it syncs every so often. You can set it where live sync or you know, every 10, 15 minutes or whatever. Okay. And cloud is probably another option for a small company or personal use. Okay. So make sure that we read this. So this is like a cheaper solution. You can go with something that's a little bit more heavy duty. Should I get a Powervolt? Not quite for a small company, right? Superior capacity, it says, right? So this kind of investment, I would go for the mid size to the large size company. But it's definitely has some of the capability to, you know, so it will tell you how many drives, see? So it's this one, and for the Powervolt, it includes 1 drive. Okay. And make sure that we read the spec for that 1 drive if it's going to be 10 terabyte. If it's not, we have to buy more drives. And as you add more drives, look at that. Huge amount of money. $2,000. Wow. Right? So pick one that you like, right? And then, you know, read about. So here's another one for Western Digital. It's 24 terabyte. Now, be careful. It says Bay. Okay. Does it contain 24 terabyte? With this price, it should be, right? Because sometimes you see that price and then it's like 1 drive and then you have to pay another $1,000 for another drive. Okay. So pick one. And you can take the description information from the page and you can add it to the assignment. We're almost done. Just a few more. We still have time. Now, you know, and then it's also a preference of brand, right? You can read the review. WD is pretty good. I think they've improved quite a bit. For some reason, I'm partial to Seagate because I've just had better experience with them, right? But you know, there are other companies that you can consider too. I bought one for my house a while back. I think it was like $300 or 20. Oh no, 10 terabytes. And then you can attach it to your network, right? Set it up where it sees your wireless router, so that way everybody can put their files on there. Everybody can back up their files on there, like, you know. And the cool part is when you enter the network with a smartphone, it asks you, right? If you sync everything, you can just put your pictures on there. Especially with the Apple devices where you can only put it on the cloud, or if you have limited internal storage, you can put it on there. Okay. I have an Android, and now my Android doesn't take external micro SD for storage anymore. So I'm limited to the internal storage. So now, like, you know, I'm more thankful that I have like a a drive that I can put on my network. And then you can protect your resources on there. So anything like tax information or, you know, anything that has your personal identifiable information, you can encrypt it. And that way, like when people, even when people breach your network, they can't just open your file, right? It's not about if, it's about when, okay? So that's what they always tell you. It's about when people breach your network. Okay, so let's talk about RPO and RTO. Okay, so if you pursue your bachelor's degree and your master's degree in security, you will have to write business continuity plan. Or if you work as a consultant. Did you know that 80% of the businesses that don't have business continuity plan will fail within the first 2 years? So that means that they're not looking at what could impact them negatively, right? Like an earthquake, fire, storm, and so on. People. So there's person-made and there's environmental. Those are the two areas that we focus on. Okay. So natural disaster is big. And in this area, you assess based on the specific area. For the person-made, it could be a physical attack, like bombing, you know, people crash the car into your business and take that down, right? And so on. Or it could be an incident that happens digitally through, you know, the networks and so on, okay? So the things that we also need to look at is power outages, anything that can cause disruption in our business, right? I think after COVID-19, people reevaluate the healthcare side of the house a little bit more, right? We never really looked at it that way. Like we have such shortage of workers that creates a slowdown in supply chain. All of these things are being impacted by COVID-19, and it really teaches us on how to really look at BCP a little bit different now. Okay, even on the IT side. Okay. In your homework assignment, we will have time to talk about that, is the business impact analysis. I recorded a video on there, so make sure you watch the video on how to do it. Okay. So in your BCP, you have to do a business impact analysis. This is part of becoming a security analyst. You have to write receipt or a consultant. Okay. So on it, you have to identify the risk. We talk about risk management before spring break. Okay. But the important thing is anything that's critical to your operation, especially your systems, needs to be identified and assessed. Your servers, even point of sale system, right? Imagine Costco, if all their point of sale system fail, right? 4 hours, you think that they're gonna lose a lot of money. So how long can it be down, right? We have to assess the amount of sales that Costco face. Let's say if it's down for 4 hours, how much sale they would make in those 4 hours. Is it acceptable? And that's how we can come up with the plan for recovery. Okay. And then we also need to address privacy threshold and the impact in privacy. A lot of tech companies facing this problem, right? In business in general, right? People say, oh, I'll just build an app for my business and just make my customer use my app. Little that they know that the third-party app requires a lot of the privacy permission in the user, right? So, and then that can be sold to a third party and it becomes that company's problem. So we have to really think about how the personal identifiable information is being forwarded, transferred, exchanged, or maintained. Okay. So these are some of the questions that you need to ask when you're doing a BIA. And everything has a template. You can use a template, which I use in the assignment for you. Okay, RTO, recovery time objective. Maximum amount of time that it takes to restore a system. Remember what I said earlier? It might take longer to restore and back up. So how do you know? Right, bless you. If I own a business like Costco, right? If I'm down for a day, how much money would I lose? Thousands in a day, right? It's like $100 store. One customer goes in there, they spend at least $100. In that span of an hour, you might have more than 100 customers. So you have to really quantify that. So the maximum, so let's say Costco said, we cannot be down for more than 1 hour. Okay, that's your objective. Okay, 60 minutes. And so on the IT side, we gotta make sure we recover within that time. Is it possible? You gotta test your backup. Does it take an hour? If it takes longer than an hour, you have to let the business side know. I cannot do this within an hour. Okay. Recovery point objective. This is the point of time where the data is lost. Remember, we talked about the full backup on Sunday and then the Monday differential, right? So what if I don't have the data for Monday? I can only go back to Sunday. I lost the whole Monday, right? So is that okay with the business? So if they accept that, that's my recovery point objective, okay? Which is to the last full backup. And then you gotta do the average. So the mean time between failure, that's gonna be the time that's presented, the average time from one point to the next. So if I fail in January, and then my system fails again in June, what's the mean time? January to June, how long? 5 months, right? But if this happens over many years, let's say 3 years, every 5 months, right? You do the calculation and you come up with the average. So that means that we gotta prepare every 5 months we're gonna fail. So let's see what's wrong, right? You gotta document it. Why is it failing every 5 months? Running out of RAM, running out of hard drive, right? Being attacked, whatever it is, you need to fix it. Okay. Mean time to recovery, the time between the restore from the fail. Okay. If we have to restore, every 10 days, oh, that's a problem. Okay. So when I assess a business, I ask a lot of the historical questions to really get a sense of what they are and where they are. And then I build my solution and charge them based on where they are and what they do. Okay. All right. So let's answer the question. I think you got some of that from the, move it up or down a little bit so you can see it together. Okay. So RTO, we said that that's going to be the maximum time to restore. And then the RPO is the point of time where the data loss is acceptable. And then the mean time between failures is the reliability that's represented by the average time between failures. How reliable is it? And then the mean time to recover is the average time to restore failed system. So that means that it took us 6 hours one time and 20 hours the next time. You take the 6 plus the 20 divided by 2. That's going to give you about 12.5 hours for the mean time. I quantify everything to minutes. It actually makes, more sense to me, but some people, they do it to the hour. The type of recovery for the site. So if the site goes down, let's say that, earthquake, fire, natural disaster, other things, right? Companies can use mobile, which they put things on trailer or 18-wheeler trucks, right? Verizon does this, AT&T does this. Communication company, they do it because in the case where storm hits in certain states, they can just take that and, move it elsewhere. They have engineers and operation on it. Now, each truck costs them at least $1 million, right? You got satellite dish, racks, all kinds of equipment on it, and the people who maintain it. So costly. You can have a mirror site, which is exact duplicate of your regular business. So let's say if I own a retail business, if I need to have a duplicate of it, it would just be a secondary store, right? But it's very expensive to run. So those things that listed there for 20, they're pricey, right? Some company, they will have like one store that's larger than usual, and that will act as a hot site in the case that the other store goes down, right? Like the branch B, if it goes down, they move all the people to branch A and then operate from there. So that's another way that you can handle the hot site or the mirror site situation. And then the cold site, it's like a few chairs and maybe one computer. And then it doesn't have anything. Then you have to move everything over or repurchase everything in the case you have to start all over again. Okay. So enterprises, you do see they have the money to do the mobile, the mirror, and the hot site, even outside of the nation. Like Facebook, right? They have 16 data center plus now, right? AWS have like 30 something all over the world. Those are their sites, their actual sites. And then they might have cold sites and some warm sites in alternate locations that are outside of, you know, their normal operations. So a lot of companies would choose like South America, sometimes Canada outside of the United States to really put out for their offsite stuff. Okay, almost done. And then lastly, disaster recovery plan is known as DRP. This is how you would recover from disaster. So when I had interns, we had a grant with the Department of Defense, and I had like 6, 8 interns that worked for a smaller company that contracted with DoD. Part of their requirement was to create a disaster recovery plan because one of the companies, you know, they produce, you know, the black box that goes onto the plane, right? So, and they got breached. So they came to us and they said, you know, have your students put together a disaster recovery plan. So that way, in the case if we face it again, we have a procedure in that plan on what to do, okay? So because DRP can contain procedures are step by step, right? Whereas policy are rules, procedures and resources that are needed. So people, right, how those people are going to be able to handle disaster. So disaster could be natural disaster or person-made disaster like hacking, breach, you know, bombing, things like that that you would deal with. Okay. And so in the case that it occurs, they're going to activate the disaster recovery plan, and it would have a list of steps on what they need to do, what kind of resources they would use, and so on, right? There was a big thing for us as a nation in the United States here to really learn from 9/11, even though it occurred a long time ago. And other countries looked at that and they also learned from that experience. And it took us hours to really respond to that particular type of disaster. And I think that after that, like we changed the way we operate as a nation on our national security level, right? I read a book. So in my doctorate, I had to read a book about that, like on how we respond communication wise and so on. And we didn't do a good job with 9/11 to start. And other countries, they saw that and they had updated also the disaster recovery plan, like Japan, right? They have a way to warn the people and so on. So now I think that we had assessed that and we improved how we communicate with our people in the case of disaster like that. Okay. And so when you apply this to personal use, you have to think about like, do you have that at home, right? In the case of disaster, where would you meet outside of your home with your family members? How do they communicate with you if their smartphone doesn't work, right? Those are the things that we need to address personal level. And also as a professional, right? We have to think about like, oh, well, if I can't come to work, how am I going to be able to communicate with my coworker to be able to get the data, you know, from my server to be able to activate it for restore? So you have to think about that, like the things that you have to face and fix and things like that in the case of disaster, right? Where would you meet outside of home? How do you communicate if you don't have your smartphone or power or things like that? Might sound drastic, but you never know, things can happen. All right, any question regarding chapter 9? Okay. All right, so save your work. You can submit it now or at the end of the week. And got some snacks. On Wednesday, we are going to do a lab for backup and restore. So because, you know, employers want to make sure that you know how to do it, especially with Windows. So we will work on that on Wednesday. All right. Thank you. Have a good day.